All right, let's talk about Jacques Lacan. Now, if you've heard of him, you probably know he has a reputation for being, well, pretty difficult to understand. But his ideas have had a huge impact on how we think. Today, we're going to try and demystify some of his key concepts, especially this fascinating idea of how our personal anxieties can show up in big public events, like a political protest.
So Lacan throws this wild idea out there, and it really makes you stop and think. What if a huge political protest wasn't just about politics? What if it was actually a psychological symptom? I mean, think about that for a second. It completely flips the script on how we look at society.
And this right here, this is the core of his big idea. Traditionally we think of a symptom, say anxiety or a phobia, as a super personal, individual thing. It's my problem. But Lacan's like, hold on a minute. He's suggesting that whole groups, even entire societies, can have symptoms. A collective action, like a strike, could be a sign of some shared, unspoken issue that's just bubbling under the surface for everyone.
Okay, so that brings us to our first big topic, symptoms beyond the self. We're going to look at how Lacan could see an entire society's issues reflected in a single strike.
So for Lacan, a strike isn't some big celebration of solidarity. Not really. He saw it as a symptom. He believed it wasn't just about the obvious stuff, wages or working conditions. No, for him, it was like a crack appearing on the surface, revealing these deep tensions and hidden desires from what he called the collective psyche, basically the shared unconscious of a group.
Okay, so if a strike is a symptom, then what's causing it? What's the disease, so to speak? Well, for Lacan, the answer is tangled up in one of his most famous and, most difficult concepts, something he calls the real.
So what is the real? Think of it this way. It's the raw, messy, chaotic part of reality that we can't ever fully put into words or symbols. It's like the static behind an old TV signal. Our language and our social rules, what Lacan calls the symbolic order, try to give us a nice, clean picture. But a symptom? That's a moment when the static, the real, just bursts right through that orderly image on the screen.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. We have Lacan's own words here. He says he has reservations about the strike because it's an organized symptom. And then he says that's bad, at least from an analyst's point of view. Kind of weird, right? You'd think being organized would be a good thing.
Which of course leads to the big question, why on earth would an organized symptom be bad? Doesn't organization make things clearer? But this is Lacan for you. He's never straightforward.
This is what you could call Lacan's fuzzy logic. For him, the meaning of a symptom is never black and white. So when a protest gets super organized, it also gets a neat, tidy, official story, right? We are striking for a 5% raise. But for Lacan, that clean narrative actually covers up the much messier, more chaotic truths from the real that are really driving things. The organization smooths everything over, which makes it way harder for an analyst to figure out what's really going on underneath. He's being deliberately ambiguous to make us question those simple stories we tell ourselves.
And this whole idea of interpretation and hidden meanings brings us right to our next point, psychoanalysis as a dialogue. Because for Lacan, figuring things out is never a one-way street.
Here we go with another one of those classic Lacan phrases. He said he was an affect for an audience, and that they heard him on the Rebound. So what does that even mean? Well, he's basically saying that communication is never as simple as me just telling you something and you getting it perfectly. It's way more complicated than that.
And this breaks down that rebound idea perfectly. First, the analyst throws an idea out there. Then, the audience catches it, but they immediately filter it through their own biases, their own history, their own baggage. So, the real meaning, the actual insight, isn't just in what the analyst said. It's created in that space between them. It's what happens when the idea bounces off the audience and comes back. It's meaning on the rebound.
So the big takeaway here is that understanding isn't something that's just handed down from an expert, it's co-created. It's this living, breathing exchange. Lacan is really pushing back against the idea of the analyst as some kind of all-knowing wizard. Instead, it's a team effort. You build the meaning together. Okay, so let's pull back a bit and look at Lacan's legacy. I mean, his ideas are obviously dense, they can be really ambiguous, so why is he still such a big deal? Why is he still so influential? Well, it's really a story of trade-offs. On the one hand, his huge strength is connecting our personal problems to bigger social issues. He shows how our private pain can actually reflect public problems. And he championed a more collaborative way of doing analysis. But
The flip side is that his writing is notoriously difficult, which means it's really easy to misinterpret him. And even though he's a master at diagnosing these collective symptoms, it's not always obvious how you're supposed to actually do anything about them.
But even with all those challenges, you just can't deny his influence. He built these incredible bridges between the inner world of our minds and the outer world of society. And because of that, his work has echoed far beyond just psychoanalysis, into fields like sociology, cultural studies, you name it. He gave us this new, powerful, if tricky, toolkit for decoding the hidden tensions all around us.
And that leaves us with one last, really powerful question to chew on. If Lacan is right, if whole societies can have symptoms that point to these deep, hidden problems, then who is the analyst? Who gets the job of trying to interpret all these collective symptoms and help us figure out what they truly mean? It's a question that takes psychoanalysis out of the doctor's office and puts it right at the heart of our shared public lives. Something to think about.